Chloe Martinez stared at her reflection in the office restroom mirror, adjusting her black blazer for the dozenth time. Today was the day she'd finally silence the office busybodies. After 3 years of fielding, still flying solo Chloe, she'd crafted the perfect solution. The problem, she'd completely made it up. At 1 a.m., fueled by her co-workers' endless wedding spam, she'd typed, "Big announcement coming soon," in the company group chat. Her thumb hit send before common sense could intervene. "Chloe!" Director Karen's voice sliced through the corridor. "Need you up front." Chloe's stomach dropped 3 floors. Karen had that tone that meant public humiliation was imminent. In the main bullpen, about 20 colleagues formed a semicircle around the conference table, including the new department head from their Denver office. A tall man in charcoal gray, all business and sharp jawlines. She'd noticed him exactly twice during his first week, both times wondering how someone could look permanently annoyed. "Everyone say hello to Ethan Brooks, our new Director of Strategic Planning," Karen announced with corporate cheerfulness. "Ethan, meet Chloe, our top budget analyst. Actually perfect timing because..." Chloe felt her face go pale. "Chloe just hinted at some major personal news. Share your exciting update." 20 eager faces swiveled her way. The silence lasted precisely 5 seconds that felt like 5 centuries. Chloe's hands went ice cold as her brain crashed like a Windows 95 computer. "The thing is, he's..." Ethan observed her with steel blue eyes and what might have been amusement. Was he enjoying watching her squirm? "It's Ethan." The words launched from her mouth like missiles. Complete silence. "Come again?" Karen blinked rapidly. Chloe's finger shot out, pointing directly at the bewildered director, her voice gaining momentum. "Ethan, my boyfriend. Crazy coincidence, right? When he said he was transferring here, I figured it might get weird mixing business with personal stuff, but surprise, life's unpredictable." Ethan's expression morphed from mild interest to absolute confusion. His pen froze mid-signature on some document. "How romantic." Karen practically bounced. "Workplace sweethearts. This deserves a proper celebration." "Celebration," Ethan repeated like a malfunctioning robot. "Exactly." Chloe's grin felt like plastic surgery gone wrong. "Just when you think you know what's coming, plot twist." "Plot twist," he mumbled, clearly struggling to process this verbal grenade. Their colleague Ashley from sales materialized with glittering eyes. "This is amazing. We have to toast this. Drinks at the Brass Monkey tonight?" "Tonight?" Chloe and Ethan synchronized their panic perfectly. "Absolutely. Office romance is like finding a unicorn." Chloe met Ethan's gaze. He was studying her with a combination of shock, irritation, and what looked suspiciously like grudging admiration for her sheer boldness. "Done deal," Karen declared with finality. 7 o'clock at the Brass Monkey for our lovebirds." As the crowd scattered into excited whispers, Ethan approached with calculated steps. "Storage room C, 3 minutes," he said quietly, his tone carrying just enough warning to make her pulse spike. "You and I are about to have a fascinating chat." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, though she couldn't tell if it was fear or something far more complicated. "End of the hall," she whispered back. "And Ethan, I have a reasonable explanation. This should be entertaining." His smile contained zero warmth. "Start thinking fast, sweetheart." Chloe paced the cramped storage room like a caged tiger when Ethan entered and shut the door with a decisive click. "So," he leaned against the door, arms crossed, "in roughly 30 seconds you turned me into your imaginary boyfriend. Is this a personal record for chaos, or do you regularly kidnap strangers for your romantic fantasies?" "I panicked." Chloe gestured wildly, nearly knocking over a stack of printer paper. "You saw Karen. She has this way of extracting information like she's running some kind of corporate interrogation unit. And everyone keeps asking about my love life like I'm a charity case." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "So you decided I'd be the solution to your problems, without consulting me? What if I had a real girlfriend?" Chloe stopped pacing and faced him. "Do you?" "That's none of your business. Do you or don't you?" He hesitated for exactly half a second. No, but that's not the point. Then what's the problem? Chloe hopped onto a filing cabinet with fake confidence. We just pretend for a few weeks until I stage a dramatic breakup. Nobody will suspect anything. You're new here anyway. You're completely out of your mind. Maybe, but now we're both stuck. She pointed toward the door. Because in 1 hour, everyone's expecting the happy couple at the Brass Monkey. And if you contradict me now, you'll look like you're being cruel to me in front of your new colleagues. Great first impression, right? Ethan ran his hand through his dark hair, clearly weighing his options. This is emotional blackmail. This is corporate survival strategy. I can't believe I'm actually considering this insanity. Chloe jumped down from the cabinet and positioned herself directly in front of him. Ethan, listen. You're the new guy. I've been here 3 years. I know everyone's quirks, office politics, who's an ally and who's a backstabber. I could be your best asset or, well, you'll have to figure out the landscape solo. Now it's professional blackmail too? Now it's strategic partnership. She extended her hand. 2 weeks. We fake a relationship, show up together at a few company events, then I'll say you cheated with someone from Denver. Everyone will pity me. You'll seem like a jerk for a few days, but they'll forget. Deal? Ethan stared at her outstretched hand like it might bite him. What do I get out of this besides a massive headache? Chloe bit her lip, thinking rapidly. I'll help you navigate the office politics. Tell you who to trust, who's sabotaging projects, the best way to handle each department head. And, she lowered her voice conspiratorially, I'll give you access to the budget files from the last 3 years that only I know how to decode properly. That's bribery. That's valuable insider information. Ethan studied her silently for several long moments. Chloe could practically see the gears turning in his analytical mind. Ground rules, he said finally. If we're doing this ridiculous charade, we do it right. No real intimacy, no blurring the lines between fake and reality. Obviously. And when this circus ends, it ends. No drama, no stalking, no sudden declarations of actual feelings. Please. Chloe rolled her eyes. You're not even close to my type. Perfect. You're definitely not mine either. They locked eyes for a moment, an odd tension crackling between them. So, Chloe extended her hand again. Partners in crime? Ethan shook her hand, his grip firm and surprisingly warm. Partners, he agreed, but when this blows up spectacularly, I'm blaming you entirely. Fair enough. Chloe grinned for the first time since the disaster began. Now we better get our story straight. We have exactly 45 minutes to become a convincing couple. Right. Ethan straightened his tie like he was preparing for battle. How exactly did we meet? Chloe's eyes lit up with mischief. Leave that to me. I'm excellent at creative storytelling. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Ethan muttered, but there was the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Don't worry, Brooks. By tonight, everyone will believe we're head over heels crazy about each other. Wonderful, he said dryly. What could possibly go wrong? The Brass Monkey was packed with the after-work crowd when Chloe spotted their colleagues claiming a large corner booth. Her palms were sweating despite the October chill, and she'd changed outfits 3 times before settling on jeans and a burgundy sweater that made her look approachable, but not desperate. Ethan appeared beside her at the entrance, looking annoyingly composed in dark jeans and a gray Henley that probably cost more than her monthly coffee budget. Ready for this performance? He murmured, offering his arm. Born ready, Chloe lied, linking her arm through his. His bicep was surprisingly solid. Focus, Martinez. Remember our story, Ethan said under his breath as they approached the group. We met at that conference in Austin last year. You spilled coffee on my presentation notes. Right, and you were initially annoyed but then charmed by my apology brownies, Chloe whispered back. I can't believe you came up with something so normal. I excel at strategic planning, remember? Karen spotted them first and waved enthusiastically. There they are, our secret couple. The entire table erupted in cheers and applause. Chloe felt her cheeks burn as Ethan's hand found the small of her back, guiding her forward. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her nervous system. "So spill everything." Ashley practically bounced in her seat. "How long have you two been hiding this from us?" Chloe opened her mouth, but Ethan smoothly intercepted. "About 8 months now. We wanted to keep things professional at work." His thumb traced a small circle on her back, and Chloe nearly jumped out of her skin. 8 months of sneaking around? Their co-worker Jake from IT looked impressed. "That takes serious willpower." "You have no idea," Chloe managed, hyper-aware of Ethan's proximity as they squeezed into the booth together. Madison from HR leaned forward conspiratorially. "Okay, but what's the real story? Love at first sight or slow burn?" Ethan and Chloe exchanged a glance. His eyes held a hint of challenge. "Slow burn, definitely," Chloe said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "This one was not impressed with me initially." "She destroyed 3 hours of work with one poorly aimed coffee cup," Ethan added, with what looked like genuine fondness. "I thought she was a walking disaster." "Hey!" Chloe elbowed him playfully, and he caught her hand, intertwining their fingers on the table. The casual intimacy made her stomach flip unexpectedly. "But then she showed up at my hotel the next morning with homemade brownies and the most adorable apology speech I've ever heard," Ethan continued, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I realized the disaster might be worth getting to know." The table collectively awed, and Chloe stared at Ethan in amazement. Where had this romantic storytelling ability been hiding? "That's so sweet." Karen clasped her hands together. "And you kept it secret this whole time?" "Long distance is complicated," Chloe found herself saying. "We didn't want to make promises we couldn't keep." "But now that I'm here permanently," Ethan lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles softly. The gesture looked completely natural, but Chloe felt electricity shoot up her arm. "Now that you're here permanently, what?" Ashley prompted eagerly. Ethan's eyes met Chloe's, and for a moment she forgot they were acting. "Now we get to find out what happens next." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. This was supposed to be fake. Why did it feel so real? "I need another drink," Jake announced, breaking the spell. "This is getting too romantic for a Tuesday night." As half the table headed to the bar, Ethan leaned closer to Chloe. "You okay? You look a little pale." "Fine," she whispered back, acutely aware of how his cologne mixed with the scent of his soap. "You're just really good at this." "Strategic planning includes contingency scenarios," he murmured, but his gaze lingered on her lips for a split second longer than necessary. "Chloe," Ashley had returned with drinks. "Tell us about the proposal. When's it happening?" Chloe choked on her beer. "Proposal? Well, you said big announcement coming soon in the group chat. We all assumed—" Panic mode activated. Chloe looked desperately at Ethan, who seemed equally caught off guard. "We're taking things slow," Ethan said carefully. "But you've been together 8 months," Madison protested. "And now you're working in the same office. It's like fate." "Fate," Chloe repeated weakly. Karen raised her martini glass. "To Chloe and Ethan, may your office romance inspire us all." The toast echoed around the table, and Chloe found herself clinking glasses while mentally calculating how quickly she could fake food poisoning and escape. As the evening wore on, she and Ethan fell into a surprisingly natural rhythm of couple behavior, sharing appetizers, finishing each other's sentences, casual touches that sent confusing signals through her nervous system. When Ethan excused himself to the restroom, Ashley immediately pounced. "Girl, he is completely smitten with you. The way he looks at you, I'm getting diabetes from all the sweetness." "He's attentive," Chloe managed. "Attentive? Honey, that man is gone. Head over heels, write poetry about your eyes, gone." Chloe's heart did something acrobatic in her chest. "You think so? I know so. And the way you light up when he talks, you're just as far gone as he is." Before Chloe could protest, Ethan returned, sliding back into the booth with easy grace. His hand automatically found hers again, and she realized Ashley might be onto something terrifying. This fake relationship was starting to feel dangerously real. 3 days after the Brass Monkey incident, Chloe's life had turned into a romantic comedy nightmare. Word of the secret couple had spread through the office faster than a computer virus, and suddenly everyone was an expert on her love life. "Chloe, darling." Sandra from Accounts Receivable cornered her by the coffee machine Thursday morning. "I heard the most delicious gossip about you and that handsome new director." Chloe nearly dropped her mug. "What gossip?" "That you two have been having secret lunch dates at that little Italian place on 5th Street. Sandra's eyes sparkled with vicarious excitement. "Marie from marketing saw you there yesterday, sharing tiramisu like proper lovebirds." The problem was, they actually had been at Luigi's yesterday, but it wasn't romantic. They'd been frantically coordinating their fake relationship timeline over spreadsheets and pasta. The tiramisu sharing had been purely accidental, when Ethan had insisted she try his dessert. "We just enjoy Italian food," Chloe said weakly. "And each other, apparently." Sandra winked and bustled away, leaving Chloe staring into her coffee like it might contain answers to her increasingly complicated life. "Rough morning?" Ethan's voice made her jump. He appeared beside her with that infuriatingly calm demeanor, looking perfectly put together in a navy suit that probably cost more than her rent. "Sandra thinks we're having romantic lunch dates," Chloe muttered. "Apparently sharing dessert is now evidence of true love." "Technically, you did feed me that tiramisu," Ethan pointed out, pouring himself coffee with methodical precision. "With your own spoon. That's fairly intimate behavior for a fake couple." Chloe's cheeks flamed. She had done that, hadn't she? Without thinking. Just like she'd been doing a lot of things without thinking lately. Touching his arm when she talked, laughing at his dry humor, feeling genuinely disappointed when their strategy meetings ended. That was strategic consistency, she said defensively. "If you say so." His tone was neutral, but she caught something flickering in his expression. Amusement? Skepticism? Something else entirely? "Attention, lovebirds!" Karen's voice boomed across the break room. "Perfect timing. I need to talk to both of you." They followed Karen to her office, where she gestured enthusiastically at her computer screen. "I just got off the phone with the Denver branch. They want to do a joint presentation next Friday for the quarterly review, both offices on video conference. And since you two have that cute long-distance romance-turned-office couple story, they specifically requested that you present together." Chloe's blood turned to ice water. Together. As a team. They think it's adorable that you're working together now. Plus, Ethan knows their systems and you know our numbers. It's perfect synergy. "Perfect," Ethan echoed, but his knuckles had gone white around his coffee cup. "The presentation is about budget optimization and strategic planning integration. Right up both your alleys. I'm thinking you can work on it over the weekend. Maybe make it a romantic working retreat?" Karen's eyebrows waggled suggestively. After they escaped Karen's office, Chloe and Ethan walked toward the elevator in stunned silence. "A joint presentation," Chloe said finally. "In front of your old colleagues, who will definitely know you never had a girlfriend named Chloe Martinez." "Yeah, that's a problem." Ethan stabbed the elevator button with unnecessary force. "My former boss, David Chen, has the memory of an elephant and the subtlety of a freight train. He'll see right through this. So what do? The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside. Ethan pressed the button for the parking garage. "We need to get our story bulletproof. And we need to practice being convincing on camera." He loosened his tie slightly, the first sign of stress she'd seen from him. "David will ask personal questions, details, timeline. He'll want to know how we met, what we have in common, what our plans are." "Our plans?" Chloe's voice cracked slightly. "Future plans. As a couple." Ethan's jaw tightened. He's going to assume we're serious. 8 months of dating, working together now. He'll expect engagement talk. The elevator dinged at the garage level, but neither of them moved to get out. "Maybe we should just come clean," Chloe said quietly. "Tell everyone it was a stupid mistake and deal with the embarrassment." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Is that what you want? The simple question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them seemed ready to examine. I don't know, Chloe admitted. This whole thing is getting so complicated and confusing. Confusing how? She met his eyes and something electric passed between them in the small elevator space. You know how. Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. No, I don't. Tell me. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. They were standing too close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to smell his cologne and the subtle scent of his soap. The way you look at me sometimes, she whispered. Like when we were at the bar and when we have our strategy meetings. It doesn't feel like acting. It's not, he said quietly, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch sent electricity straight to her toes. Ethan. I know this is supposed to be fake, he murmured, his thumb tracing along her cheek. But somewhere between the coffee spill story and watching you laugh at Jake's terrible jokes, I stopped pretending. That's impossible. You said I wasn't your type. I lied. His other hand found her waist, drawing her closer. You're exactly my type, and it's terrifying. Chloe's breath caught as he leaned down, his forehead touching hers. This is going to complicate everything. Everything's already complicated, he pointed out, his lips hovering just inches from hers. What's a little more chaos? Famous last words, she breathed. But she didn't pull away. Chloe. His voice was rough with something that sounded dangerously like real emotion. The elevator doors started to close, and Ethan's hand shot out to stop them, the moment broken by the mechanical interruption. They stepped apart, both breathing harder than they should have been after a simple conversation. We should... Ethan cleared his throat, straightening his tie again. Yeah, work on the presentation. Chloe's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. My place or yours? The question came out more intimate than either of them intended. Yours, Chloe said quickly. I mean for work. Strategy. Presentation prep. Right. Strategy. But the way he said it made her stomach flip with anticipation. Saturday morning, she managed. Saturday morning, he confirmed, but his eyes were saying something entirely different. As they finally exited the elevator and headed to their respective cars, Chloe realized their fake relationship had just crossed a line into uncharted territory. The scariest part wasn't that they were about to be found out. The scariest part was that she didn't want to be. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Seattle look like a postcard. And Chloe stood outside Ethan's downtown apartment building clutching a bag of bagels and enough nervous energy to power the Space Needle. She'd changed clothes 4 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a cream sweater that struck the right balance between casual and... I definitely didn't spend an hour getting ready for a fake work session. Ethan's apartment was everything she'd expected. Clean lines, expensive furniture, and a view of Elliott Bay that probably cost more than her annual salary. What she hadn't expected was how domestic it would feel when he answered the door in worn jeans and a Seattle Seahawks t-shirt, his usually perfect hair slightly messed, and a genuine smile replacing his corporate mask. Coffee's already brewing, he said, taking the bagel bag from her hands. I figured we'd need industrial-strength caffeine to make it through David's interrogation prep. You have no idea how much I depend on caffeine for basic human functioning, Chloe admitted, following him into the spacious kitchen. My blood type is basically espresso negative. Ethan laughed. Actually laughed, not his polite office chuckle. And the sound did something dangerous to her cardiovascular system. Good thing I invested in a proper machine then. He gestured toward what looked like a spaceship had landed on his granite counter. Fair warning, I take my coffee seriously. Some people say obsessively, but I prefer with appropriate dedication. Show me what you've got, Brooks. Chloe hoisted herself onto one of the bar stools, trying to ignore how natural this felt. Impress me with your caffeination skills. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in coffee preparation that somehow turned into the most relaxed conversation they'd ever had. Ethan moved around his kitchen with easy confidence, explaining the origin of his beans while Chloe peppered him with questions about his apparent secret life as a coffee connoisseur. So you're telling me, she said around a bite of perfectly toasted everything bagel, that Mr. Serious Strategic Planning has a hidden addiction to artisanal coffee culture? Everyone needs a vice, Ethan replied, settling across from her with his own mug. Besides, good coffee is just strategic planning for consciousness. You analyze variables, optimize processes, execute with precision. You just made coffee sound like a business proposal. Everything sounds like a business proposal when you think about it logically. Chloe shook her head in amused disbelief. You're such a nerd. I had no idea. There's a lot you don't know about me, he said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. He was watching her with that expression again, the one that made her forget they were supposed to be acting. Like what? Like I hate strategic planning. The admission came out quietly, as if he'd surprised himself by saying it. What? Chloe nearly choked on her coffee. But you're brilliant at it. Karen raves about your presentations, and the Denver office specifically requested you for the quarterly review. Ethan shrugged, suddenly looking younger and less certain than she'd ever seen him. Being good at something doesn't mean you love it. I fell into strategic planning because I was good with numbers and systems. It pays well, impresses people, looks great on paper. But if I'm being honest, yeah, I'd rather be doing something that actually matters. Something creative, maybe. I used to write before business school convinced me that artistic pursuits were financially irresponsible. Chloe stared at him. You write? Like novels? Short stories, mostly. Nothing published, nothing serious. Just words on paper that make me feel like myself instead of some corporate robot in an expensive suit. The vulnerability in his admission made her chest tight. This was a side of Ethan she'd never imagined existed. Uncertain, creative, human in ways that had nothing to do with quarterly projections and budget optimizations. I'd like to read something of yours sometime, she said softly. Would you? He seemed genuinely surprised. Most people think it's a waste of time. Most people are idiots. The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended. Art isn't a waste of time. It's what makes life worth living. They looked at each other across the kitchen island, and Chloe felt something shift between them. Some wall coming down that had been there since the moment she'd accidentally declared him her boyfriend. We should probably start working on the presentation, Ethan said eventually, but he made no move to get up. Probably, Chloe agreed, also not moving. David's going to ask about our first date. Right, our fake first date. And what we fight about. Do we fight? Ethan's mouth curved into a small smile. Every couple fights, Chloe. If we claim we don't, David will know we're lying. He's been married 15 years. He knows relationships aren't all roses and romantic dinners. Okay, so what do we fight about? You leave coffee mugs everywhere and never put them in the dishwasher. Hey, Chloe protested. How do you know I do that? Lucky guess based on the mug situation in the office break room. She threw a piece of bagel at him, which he caught with reflexes that were annoyingly impressive. Fine, she said. You're obsessively organized and it drives me crazy. You probably color code your sock drawer. Guilty as charged. Ethan held up his hands. But in my defense, efficiency reduces daily decision fatigue. See? That right there. That's exactly the kind of thing I'd complain about. Good. We're building authentic relationship conflict. He pulled out his laptop and opened it between them. What else? David will want to know our future plans. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Future plans. As if they had any idea what they were doing beyond next Friday's presentation. We could say we're taking things slow, Chloe suggested. Focusing on our careers right now. David won't buy that. He'll want specifics, timeline. When we're moving in together, when we're getting engaged, what our 5-year plan looks like. 5-year plan? Chloe's voice cracked slightly. For our fake relationship? For our fake life together, Ethan corrected. David thinks in long-term strategy. He'll expect us to have thought this through. They spent the next hour crafting an elaborate fictional future, moving in together after the holidays. Engagement sometime next year. A small wedding because they were both practical people who didn't believe in spending ridiculous amounts of money on one day. With each invented detail, Chloe found herself wondering what it would be like if any of it were real. "Okay," Ethan said finally. "Let's practice. I'll be David. You be yourself." He straightened his shoulders and adopted a more formal tone. "So Chloe, tell me about this whirlwind romance. 8 months is pretty serious. Are you two thinking about taking the next step?" Chloe found herself blushing as if the question were real. We're very happy together. Ethan's an amazing partner." "Partner?" Ethan as David repeated with a knowing smile. Interesting word choice, very businesslike for someone discussing love. "I meant," Chloe stumbled, feeling flustered. "He's an amazing boyfriend. We complement each other really well." "How so?" "He keeps me grounded," she said, the words coming easier now. "I tend to be impulsive and chaotic, but Ethan helps me think things through. And I think I help him be more spontaneous, more willing to take risks. And you, Ethan?" He turned to address himself, then switched back to his normal voice. "What does Chloe bring to your life?" "She makes me laugh," Ethan said simply, and something in his tone made Chloe look up sharply. He wasn't acting anymore. "She sees possibilities where I see problems. She turns ordinary moments into adventures. She makes me want to be braver." The sincerity in his voice made Chloe's breath catch. They were supposed to be practicing, but this felt like confession. "That's," she started, then stopped, not sure what she'd been about to say. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text, breaking the spell. He glanced at it and frowned. "David," he said. "He wants to move the presentation to Monday instead of Friday. Some kind of scheduling conflict with the board meeting." "Monday?" Chloe's voice came out higher than intended. "That's 3 days away." "Gets worse. He wants to do dinner afterward. Him and his wife, us, and a few other people from both offices. A celebration of the successful collaboration between branches." "A double date," Chloe said faintly, "with your former boss and his wife, who will absolutely grill us about every aspect of our relationship while pretending to make polite conversation." They stared at each other across the laptop, the magnitude of what they'd gotten themselves into settling over them like a heavy blanket. "We could still back out," Ethan said quietly. "Tell everyone the truth. Deal with the embarrassment and move on." "Could we?" Chloe asked. "Really? After all this?" Ethan closed the laptop slowly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Chloe took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm saying that somewhere between the coffee spill story and right now, this stopped feeling fake to me too." The admission hung between them, electric and terrifying. "Chloe, I know it's complicated," she rushed on before she could lose her nerve. "I know we started this whole thing as a lie. And I know you're probably going to transfer back to Denver eventually. And I know office relationships are messy and problematic, but..." Ethan stood up and walked around the island, stopping directly in front of her stool. But I don't want to pretend anymore," she whispered. "Not about this." He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to fake." "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I'm sure." "Good," he murmured, leaning down until his forehead touched hers. "Because I've been wanting to do this since Tuesday night at the bar." When he finally kissed her, it was nothing like the performance they'd been planning for David's benefit. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper and more urgent as she wound her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. He tasted like coffee and possibility. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless, Chloe realized that their fake relationship had just become the most real thing in her life. "So," Ethan said, his voice rough around the edges, "I guess we don't have to worry about convincing David we're a real couple." "Guess not," Chloe agreed, unable to stop smiling. "But we should probably practice some more, to make sure we're really convincing." "I like how you think, Martinez," Ethan said, kissing her again. "Strategic planning at its finest." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle sparkled in the afternoon sunshine, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy discovering that the best lies sometimes turn into the most beautiful truths. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that seemed to seep into your bones and settle there permanently, perfectly matching Chloe's emotional state. A swirling hurricane of excitement, abject terror, anticipation, and the peculiar brand of nausea that comes from knowing your entire future might depend on the next few hours of your life. She'd spent Sunday evening at Ethan's downtown apartment, ostensibly putting the finishing touches on their presentation slides and rehearsing answers to potential questions, but mostly discovering that he made pancakes that could win James Beard Awards and looked devastatingly unfairly attractive in reading glasses, while cross-referencing quarterly budget projections with the kind of focused intensity that made her forget how to breathe properly. The evening had been a study in domestic perfection that terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. Ethan moving around his kitchen with easy confidence, explaining the origin story of his ridiculously expensive coffee beans, while she perched on his counter stealing bites of pancake batter. The way he'd absently reached over to tuck her hair behind her ear while reviewing spreadsheets. The moment when she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder on the couch and woken up covered with a soft throw blanket, his laptop still balanced on his knees as he worked quietly beside her. It had felt so natural, so right, so much like the kind of future she'd never dared to imagine for herself that she'd barely slept when she finally went home to her own apartment at midnight, her mind spinning with possibilities and what-ifs, and the growing certainty that somewhere between fake coffee dates and real Saturday morning pancakes, she'd gone and fallen completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly in love. Now, standing in front of her bedroom mirror at 5:47 a.m., after approximately 3 hours of fitful sleep, punctuated by stress dreams involving PowerPoint presentations, and David Chen asking increasingly personal questions while she stood naked in front of the entire company, she was experiencing a full-scale existential crisis disguised as a wardrobe malfunction. Her bed looked like a clothing bomb had detonated, blazers and sweaters and dresses draped over every available surface as she'd tried and rejected outfit after outfit in search of something that would make her look professional, competent, trustworthy, and completely not like someone who had built an elaborate romantic deception around a man she barely knew 2 weeks ago. Professional but approachable, she muttered to her reflection, holding up a navy blazer against her body and immediately discarding it as too formal. Confident but not arrogant, competent but not cold, in love but not unprofessional, fake but actually real, but not obviously fake-turned real. How is any of this even remotely possible? A gray sweater joined the navy blazer on her bed, followed by a white button-down that looked too much like she was trying too hard, then a burgundy dress that seemed too casual for a presentation that could determine both her career trajectory and her romantic future, then back to the blazer, then to a black sweater that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which, considering how badly this could go, might be appropriate. Her phone buzzed against her nightstand, and she grabbed it with the desperation of someone drowning who had just been thrown a life preserver. "Stop spiraling," Ethan had texted. "I can practically hear you overthinking from across town, and it's making me nervous. You're going to be absolutely perfect today. Also, I'm bringing you the good coffee from that place downtown that costs more than most people's car payments, because this situation calls for premium caffeine." Despite the churning anxiety in her stomach that felt like she'd swallowed a washing machine on the spin cycle, Chloe found herself smiling at her phone screen. Real boyfriends, she was discovering with a mixture of wonder and mild panic, came with perks that fake ones definitely lacked, like knowing exactly what to say to make her breathe a little easier, understanding that her relationship with caffeine bordered on the codependent, and somehow managing to be supportive and calming even when they were presumably dealing with their own stress about the same impossible situation. She texted back, "You're assuming I'm going to be perfect instead of a nervous wreck who forgets how to speak English under pressure. That's optimistic of you." His response came immediately. "I've seen you handle angry clients, impossible deadlines, and Karen before her morning coffee. You can handle one video conference with my former boss. Besides, we're in this together now. Team Martinez-Brooks. Team Martinez-Brooks? I'm workshopping couple names. Martinez-Brooks has a nice corporate ring to it, don't you think? Despite everything, Chloe laughed out loud. You're ridiculous. You say that like it's a bad thing. See you in an hour. Wear the cream sweater. It makes your eyes look incredible. Chloe glanced at the cream cashmere sweater she'd tried on and rejected twice already, then back at her phone. How do you know what sweater I'm considering? Lucky guess. Also, you wore it to lunch last Tuesday, and I may have spent the entire meal distracted by how good you looked in it. That was a work lunch, with spreadsheets. Your point being? I can appreciate excellent sweater choices and quarterly budget analyses. I'm multi-talented like that. Chloe shook her head, grinning despite her nerves, and reached for the cream sweater. If she was going down in flames today, at least she'd look good doing it. She finally settled on the cream cashmere sweater, which did, in fact, make her eyes look better than usual. Dark jeans that made her legs look endless, and boots that could handle Seattle weather while adding just enough height to make her feel capable of conquering the corporate world, or at least surviving the next few hours without completely humiliating herself. By the time she made it to the office 47 minutes later, clutching her travel mug like a talisman, and mentally rehearsing their relationship backstory for the 1,000th time, Ethan was already stationed at her desk like some kind of perfectly dressed guardian angel. He was holding 2 of those ridiculously expensive lattes from the artisanal place downtown that charged $15 for coffee drinks with names like The Transcendent Experience and Liquid Enlightenment, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and sporting a smile that made her cardiovascular system forget how to function properly. Ready for this? He asked, handing over one of the lattes with the reverence typically reserved for religious artifacts. Define ready, Chloe said, accepting the coffee with genuine gratitude. The first sip was like a religious experience, rich and complex and exactly what her nervous system needed to remember how to be human. If you mean, have I memorized every detail of our elaborate fictional backstory, practiced looking naturally affectionate in bathroom mirrors for the past hour, and mentally rehearsed responses to approximately 47 different scenarios of how this could go catastrophically wrong, then absolutely. If you mean, am I emotionally prepared to lie convincingly to your former boss, while simultaneously trying not to think about how that tie makes your eyes look like something out of a romance novel, then we might have a serious problem. Ethan's tie was, objectively speaking, a masterpiece of men's fashion. Deep navy silk that brought out the steel blue of his eyes, and made Chloe want to grab it and use it to pull him into supply closets for highly unprofessional activities that would definitely violate several sections of the employee handbook. You think my tie makes my eyes look good? Ethan asked, and there was something in his voice, a hint of genuine pleasure underneath his attempt at casual indifference, that made her look up sharply. Focus, Brooks, Chloe said, though she could feel heat creeping up her neck like a slow-moving fire. We have exactly 94 minutes before the video conference, and I need at least 92 of those minutes to stop feeling like I'm about to throw up from nerves. I have a theory about that, Ethan said, glancing around the slowly filling office to make sure no one was within eavesdropping distance. The early morning crowd was still in that pre-coffee zombie state, which meant their conversation was relatively private. Conference room B, 5 minutes. I have a strategic intervention planned. Ethan, we absolutely cannot. Not that, he interrupted quickly, though his cheeks took on a distinctly pink tinge that made him look younger and more approachable. Although, for the record, that's not entirely off the table for future discussion when we're not about to commit corporate fraud via romantic deception. This is something else. Trust me. Famous last words, Chloe muttered, but she was already mentally calculating whether 5 minutes was enough time for whatever he had planned. Have I steered you wrong yet? We've been fake dating for 8 days, Ethan. The sample size is a little small for determining your reliability as a strategic planner in matters of romantic deception. Fair point, he conceded. But I did successfully convince everyone at the Brass Monkey that we were madly in love, and I got you through dinner with Karen and her husband without anyone questioning our relationship timeline. You also made me fall for you for real, which was definitely not part of the original strategic plan. The words were out before Chloe could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a confession she hadn't meant to make. Ethan's expression shifted, something warm and intense flickering in his eyes that made her stomach flip in the best possible way. "That wasn't an accident," he said quietly, his voice dropping to a level that was meant for her ears only. "That was the best strategic outcome I could have hoped for." Before she could respond to that life-altering statement, Karen's voice cut through their moment like a buzzer ending a game show round. "Good morning, lovebirds," she called from across the office, waving enthusiastically. "Ready for your big presentation? The whole office is rooting for you." "No pressure at all," Chloe said weakly. "None whatsoever," Ethan agreed. "Conference room B now." 5 minutes later, Chloe found herself in the smallest conference room with Ethan, and a white bakery box that smelled like heaven had opened a pastry shop and decided to specialize in making people forget their troubles through the strategic application of sugar and carbohydrates. "Comfort food bribery?" she asked, eyeing the box with the kind of suspicion and longing typically reserved for ex-boyfriends and sample sales. "Strategic psychological intervention," Ethan corrected, opening the box with a flourish to reveal an assortment of donuts that looked like they'd been crafted by pastry angels, working overtime to create edible perfection. "I've been thinking about this situation all wrong. We've been so focused on not getting caught in our lies that we've forgotten the most important variable in this entire equation." "Which is?" Chloe asked, already reaching for what appeared to be a chocolate old-fashioned with some kind of glaze that probably contained more calories than she typically consumed in a day, but looked like it might be worth throwing her diet out the window. "We're not really lying anymore," Ethan said, settling into the chair across from her with his own donut selection, something that looked like it involved maple and bacon, and was probably designed by someone who understood that breakfast pastries were a legitimate food group, not about the things that actually matter. "Yes, we completely fabricated our origin story and timeline, and yes, we've created an elaborate fictional narrative about our relationship history that would make romance novelists weep with envy, but the actual feelings, the way we are together when nobody's watching and we're not performing for an audience, the fact that I spent all of yesterday thinking about kissing you instead of reviewing budget projections, that's all completely, genuinely, terrifyingly real now." Chloe paused mid-bite, a piece of chocolate-glazed perfection halfway to her mouth. "So what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying we stop trying to perform being in love and just be in love. David Chen has been working in corporate environments for 30 years. He's smart enough to see through any act we put on, no matter how well rehearsed. But he's not going to question genuine emotion. The best lies, the ones that actually work, are the ones that are mostly true." "Genuine emotion," Chloe repeated slowly, her heart doing something acrobatic and potentially dangerous in her chest. "You mean like the fact that somewhere between fake coffee dates and real Saturday morning pancakes, I've gone and fallen completely, stupidly, terrifyingly in love with you. And now I'm not sure if I'm more scared of David Chen figuring out we're frauds, or of you realizing that I'm in way over my head here." Ethan's entire expression softened, and he reached across the small table to cup her face in his hands with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Like the fact that I fell first, probably somewhere around Tuesday night when you were telling that story about your college roommate's disastrous attempt at making Thanksgiving dinner, and you got so animated that you knocked over Ashley's drink, and instead of being embarrassed, you just started laughing like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. You looked so alive, so completely, authentically yourself, and I realized I wanted to see that look on your face every day for the rest of my life." "That's terrifyingly specific," Chloe whispered, leaning into his touch. "I'm good with details," he said, brushing his thumb across her cheekbone in a gesture that sent electricity straight to her toes. "It's part of my charm." "Your charm is going to be the death of me," she said. But she was smiling, feeling some of the tension in her shoulders finally start to ease. "Good thing I'm certified in CPR," Ethan murmured, leaning down to kiss her softly. The kiss was supposed to be reassuring, she thought dimly, as his lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her heart race. But kissing Ethan had the opposite effect on her stress levels. It made everything more intense, more complicated, more real in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. It made her remember that they weren't just playing pretend anymore, that whatever this was between them had become something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth risking everything to keep. "Better?" he asked against her lips when they finally broke apart, both of them breathing a little harder than a simple kiss warranted. "Much," she lied, because kissing him always made everything simultaneously better and infinitely more complicated. Though I should probably point out that making out in conference rooms probably wasn't part of your original strategic plan. My original strategic plan was to help you avoid social embarrassment for 2 weeks and then return to our normal professional relationship," Ethan said, straightening his tie with hands that weren't quite steady. "I think it's safe to say that plan has been completely abandoned in favor of a much more interesting alternative. Which is, seeing where this goes," he said simply. "All of it. The real relationship, the professional partnership, the possibility that we might actually be perfect for each other. In ways that have nothing to do with fake backstories and everything to do with the fact that you make me laugh, and I make you feel safe, and together we're better than either of us is alone." Chloe stared at him, her half-eaten donut forgotten. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is simple," Ethan said. "Maybe we've been overthinking it. You realize that if this goes badly, if David figures out we're lying and reports it to HR, we could both be fired? Our careers could be over. You realize that if this goes well, if we actually pull this off and convince everyone that we're the real deal, we're going to have to keep being the real deal. There's no going back to fake after today." Chloe considered this, weighing the risks and benefits like the financial analyst she was. "So we're talking about a high-stakes, high-reward scenario with significant potential for both success and catastrophic failure." "That's one way to put it. I hate high-risk investments," she said. "I know. I prefer steady, predictable returns with minimal volatility. I know that too. This is the opposite of steady and predictable." "Completely opposite," Ethan agreed cheerfully. Chloe finished her donut thinking. "But the potential returns could be life-changing," he said softly. "Could be worth the risk. Could be the best investment you've ever made." She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the way his hair was slightly messed despite his usual perfect grooming, the way his tie was just a fraction crooked from their kiss, the way he was watching her with a combination of hope and terror that probably matched her own expression, and made her decision. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay. Let's do this. Let's be real. Let's stop pretending to be in love and start actually being in love and see what happens." Ethan's smile was bright enough to power the entire Pacific Northwest. "Are you sure?" "I'm terrified," Chloe admitted. "But I'm sure. Besides, you were right about one thing. We make a good team. If we're going to risk our careers on an elaborate romantic deception, at least we're doing it together." "Together," Ethan repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a promise. 2 hours later, they sat side by side in the main conference room, laptops open and cameras adjusted to their most flattering angles, with what felt like half the company arranged in chairs behind them like some kind of corporate peanut gallery. Karen had insisted that everyone who could spare the time should witness this groundbreaking collaboration between departments, which meant their audience included not just their immediate colleagues, but also people from accounting, marketing, HR, IT, and what appeared to be several interns who had absolutely no business reason to be there, except pure curiosity about the office's most talked-about couple. The energy in the room was festive, almost party-like, with people chattering excitedly about the presentation and making predictions about how impressed the Denver office would be. Ashley had brought coffee for everyone. Jake from IT had somehow procured bagels, and there was a general sense of anticipation that made Chloe feel like she was about to perform at the Super Bowl halftime show rather than deliver a quarterly budget analysis. "Places everyone," Karen called out like a stage manager, and the chatter died down as people settled into their seats. "Our stars need to focus." The large wall monitor flickered to life with the kind of high-definition digital clarity that made Chloe acutely aware of every detail of her appearance, revealing the Denver office conference room where David Chen sat surrounded by several other executives who looked like they took their coffee black, their quarterly projections seriously, and their strategic planning meetings with the intensity of military operations. David himself was exactly what Chloe had expected from Ethan's descriptions, a compact man in his 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of smile that suggested he was already 3 steps ahead of whatever game you thought you were playing. He had the bearing of someone who had spent decades in boardrooms and could read a budget report like poetry. But there was something genuinely warm in his expression when he looked at Ethan that spoke to real affection and mentorship. The other executives were a mix of ages and backgrounds, but they all had that particular look of people who had climbed corporate ladders and now spent their days making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars. They looked interested, engaged, and exactly like the kind of people who would notice inconsistencies in personal stories and ask follow-up questions that could expose elaborate deceptions. "Ethan." David's face lit up with unmistakable pleasure, and his genuine affection was clearly visible even through the video connection. "Look at you, all settled into life in the Pacific Northwest. How's Seattle treating you? Besides the obvious improvement in your mood and general demeanor, I mean." "Can't complain," Ethan replied with easy confidence that Chloe envied. "Great team, interesting challenges, excellent coffee culture, and the hiking opportunities are unparalleled. Plus, the rain isn't nearly as depressing as everyone warned me it would be." High praise from someone who used to complain about Denver's dry air. David laughed, but his attention was already shifting to Chloe with the kind of focused interest that made her feel like a specimen being examined under a very powerful microscope. "And you must be the famous Chloe Martinez. I've heard so much about you, though getting information out of Ethan about his personal life is typically like extracting classified documents from the Pentagon." "All good things, I hope," Chloe managed, acutely aware that her smile felt slightly frozen and that Ethan's hand was resting on her knee under the conference table in a gesture that was both steadying and distracting. His thumb traced small, reassuring circles against her jeans, and she found herself focusing on that small touch to keep her nerves from spiraling completely out of control. Well, getting details was like conducting an interrogation, but when pressed, our usually tight-lipped strategic planner did let slip that someone very special was keeping him happy in the Emerald City. David's eyes sharpened with the kind of interest that suggested he found puzzles entertaining and was very, very good at solving them. Though he somehow failed to mention that this someone happened to work in the same office. That's quite an interesting oversight for someone whose job requires attention to detail. "Small world," Chloe said, hoping her voice sounded more casual than it felt. Under the table, Ethan's thumb paused in its reassuring circles, and she could feel the subtle shift in his posture that meant he was calculating probabilities and risk assessments in real time. "Indeed," David said, and something in his tone made Chloe's stomach clench with premonition. Quite the coincidence. But let's dive into the business at hand first, shall we? I understand you two have put together a comprehensive analysis of budget optimization strategies that's going to revolutionize how we think about cross-departmental resource allocation. That's quite a claim. That might be overselling it slightly, Ethan said with a laugh that sounded perfectly natural to anyone who didn't know him well enough to detect the slight tension underneath. But we're confident you'll find our recommendations both practical and profitable. Modest as always, David replied. Well then, let's see what you've got. I'm particularly interested in your methodology, how you identified the optimization opportunities and what your implementation timeline looks like. What followed? was 53 minutes of the most intense professional performance of Chloe's entire career. Despite the anxiety thrumming through her nervous system like a caffeine overdose combined with pre-exam jitters, she found herself settling into the familiar rhythm of presenting financial data. Numbers had always made sense to her in ways that people often didn't. They followed logical patterns, told clear stories, and behaved according to predictable rules that didn't change based on emotions or social dynamics. She and Ethan fell into a collaborative flow that felt as natural as breathing, anticipating each other's points, building seamlessly on each other's analyses, and creating the kind of professional partnership that drew appreciative murmurs from both offices. When Ethan smoothly transitioned from cost analysis to implementation strategy, Chloe was ready with the supporting data. When she identified potential obstacles, he had solutions prepared. When the Denver team asked challenging questions about projected savings, they tag-teamed the responses with an efficiency that impressed even themselves. Chloe found herself genuinely impressed by Ethan's presentation skills. He had a way of making complex strategic concepts accessible without being condescending, and he gave her credit for insights in a way that felt generous rather than performative. When he smiled at her after she successfully fielded a particularly challenging question about quarterly budget projections and long-term cost savings, the warmth and pride in his expression felt entirely real, entirely genuine, and entirely unrelated to their fake relationship performance. "Outstanding work, both of you," David said when they wrapped up the formal presentation portion, and the approval in his voice was unmistakable. "Truly exceptional. The board is going to be thrilled with these projections. You've identified cost savings I didn't even know were possible, and your implementation timeline is both aggressive and realistic. You've managed to be innovative without being reckless, thorough without being overly conservative." "Thank you," Chloe said, feeling a genuine flush of professional pride. It was a collaborative effort. Ethan's strategic insights really drove the analysis. "And Chloe's financial modeling made it all possible," Ethan added. "She sees patterns in the data that I would have missed completely." "You make an impressive team," David observed, and there was something in his tone that suggested he was talking about more than just their professional collaboration. The kind of partnership that produces results neither person could achieve alone. "We think so too," Ethan said, and his fingers found Chloe's under the table, squeezing gently in a gesture that sent electricity up her arm, and reminded her that they were about to transition from the safe territory of budget analysis into the much more dangerous realm of personal questions. "Speaking of impressive partnerships," David continued, and Chloe felt her stomach drop as his expression shifted from professional approval to personal curiosity. "I have to admit I'm fascinated by this romantic development. 8 months of long-distance dating, and now you're working together in the same office. That's quite a fairy tale coincidence. Almost too good to be true, you might say." "Here we go," Chloe thought, her pulse spiking to what felt like cardiac event levels. This was the moment they'd been preparing for, rehearsing for, dreading since the moment she'd accidentally declared Ethan her boyfriend in front of half the company. "Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor," Ethan said with admirable calm, though Chloe could feel the tension radiating from his body like heat from a radiator. "Or maybe it just knows what we need better than we do." David mused, leaning back in his chair with the expression of someone settling in for an entertaining and thorough interrogation. "Interesting perspective. And Chloe, I'm curious, what exactly attracted you to our famously methodical strategic planner here?" "Ethan's many things. Brilliant, dedicated, reliable, but spontaneous has never been one of his defining characteristics. He once spent 3 weeks researching the optimal time to schedule a staff meeting." Chloe felt 20 pairs of eyes focus on her with laser intensity from the Seattle office, plus however many were watching from Denver. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the chance to either sell their fiction convincingly or expose it entirely with one wrong word, one hesitation, one detail that didn't ring true. But as she looked at Ethan, remembering his confession about hating strategic planning, about wanting to write, about feeling trapped in a career that looked impressive on paper but left him feeling empty and unfulfilled, she realized she didn't have to lie at all. She could tell the truth, maybe not the whole truth about their fake relationship origins, but the truth about who he really was underneath the corporate exterior. "That's where you're completely wrong," she said, and was surprised by how steady and confident her voice sounded. "Ethan's one of the most creative, intuitive people I know. He sees solutions where other people only see problems. He takes calculated risks that pay off in ways nobody expects. He makes me want to be better at everything I do, more thoughtful about my choices, more strategic about my goals, more willing to think outside conventional frameworks." She paused, meeting Ethan's eyes and seeing something like wonder in his expression as she continued. "He challenges me to think bigger and dream smarter. He makes me feel like the version of myself I always wanted to be, but never quite knew how to become." She wasn't acting anymore, she realized with startling clarity. Every word was completely, utterly, devastatingly true. David's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline like they were attempting to escape from his forehead entirely. "High praise indeed. That's quite a testimonial. And Ethan, what does the lovely and obviously brilliant Chloe bring to your extremely well-organized, carefully planned existence?" "Chaos," Ethan said immediately, and Chloe felt heat flood her cheeks as several people in both conference rooms chuckled. But then he continued, his voice taking on a quality that made everyone in both rooms lean forward slightly, as if they were witnessing something rare and precious. "The absolute best kind of chaos. She makes me remember that life isn't a spreadsheet to be optimized or a strategic plan to be executed flawlessly. She turns ordinary Tuesday afternoons into adventures and makes me laugh when I take myself too seriously, which is more often than I care to admit." He turned to look directly at her, and Chloe felt her breath catch at the intensity and sincerity in his eyes. "She challenges every assumption I make about how things should be done, and she's usually right. She makes me want to be braver, to take risks that matter, to stop playing it safe all the time just because safe feels comfortable. She makes me remember who I wanted to be before I got so caught up in who I thought I should be." The conference room had gone completely quiet. Even the executives on the Denver end seemed to be hanging on every word, and Chloe could hear her own heartbeat in the silence that followed Ethan's declaration. "Well," David said finally, and his smile had shifted from analytical to genuinely moved, "that certainly sounds like the real deal to me. Love, I mean. The kind that changes you, makes you better, makes you want to be the person your partner sees when they look at you." Chloe felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her slightly dizzy. But David wasn't finished with his inquiry. She could see it in his expression, the shift from moved observer back to curious interrogator. "Just one more question, if you'll indulge an old man's curiosity," he said, and something in his tone made Chloe's relief evaporate instantly, replaced by a cold dread that settled in her stomach like a lead weight. "Ethan, you mentioned Chloe in our phone conversation last month, when I asked how you were settling into Seattle, whether you were making connections, building a life there. But I could have sworn you said her name was Claire. Did I misremember? Or has your memory improved since moving to the coffee capital of the world?" The world stopped. Time seemed to freeze completely as Chloe felt every drop of blood in her body drain toward her feet, leaving her lightheaded and cold. The silence that descended on both conference rooms was deafening, not the comfortable quiet of people listening intently, but the terrible loaded silence of a bomb that had just been dropped, and everyone was waiting for the explosion. She could feel 20 pairs of eyes swiveling between her and Ethan like spectators at a tennis match, could hear the sudden shift in breathing patterns that meant everyone was holding their breath, waiting for an explanation that would either save them or destroy them completely. In her peripheral vision, she could see Karen's confusion, Ashley's dawning realization, Jake's barely suppressed expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of drama to unfold. Beside her, Ethan had gone completely still, his hand frozen on her knee, his face cycling through what she recognized as his mental process when presented with an unsolvable problem. The rapid calculation of probabilities, the assessment of available options, The growing realization that there was no strategic solution that would save them from this moment. Ethan started, then stopped, his voice catching slightly. She could practically see him running through possible responses and finding them all catastrophically inadequate. David's expression had shifted back to sharp, professional interest, not unkind, but intensely focused in the way of someone who had just detected an inconsistency and was determined to understand it. The other Denver executives were leaning forward slightly, their attention fully engaged by what was clearly developing into the most interesting quarterly review meeting any of them had attended in years. The silence stretched on, becoming more damning with each passing second. Chloe realized that everyone was waiting for them to provide an explanation, and the longer they remained silent, the more obvious it became that they didn't have a good one. She could feel the moment slipping away from them, could sense the growing awareness in the room that something wasn't right, that the love story everyone had been celebrating might not be exactly what it appeared to be. In another few seconds, someone would start asking more questions, and their carefully constructed fiction would collapse completely. But then something strange and unexpected happened. Instead of the panic she'd been anticipating, instead of the overwhelming fear that had been building in her chest, Chloe felt an odd sense of calm settle over her like a warm blanket on a cold day. Maybe it was the sugar crash from the donut finally hitting her system, or maybe it was the realization that she was tired of living in constant fear of being found out. But suddenly she knew exactly what she needed to do. The truth, she realized, wasn't nearly as scary as the lies had become. "Actually," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence with surprising clarity and strength, "there's something Ethan and I need to tell all of you. Something we should have said from the beginning." "Chloe," Ethan said quietly, and she heard both warning and question in his voice, a desperate attempt to determine whether she was about to save them or destroy them both. "No, it's okay," she said, turning to face him briefly with a smile that she hoped conveyed more confidence than she felt. "It's time. We've been living with this long enough." She turned back to face the camera directly, looking David Chen straight in the eye through the screen, her decision made and her course set. David's absolutely right to be confused, and he deserves an honest answer. You all do. She could feel the energy in both conference rooms shift from confused tension to riveted attention, as if everyone collectively realized they were about to witness something significant. "The truth is," Chloe continued, her voice gaining strength and certainty with each word, "Ethan and I haven't been dating for 8 months. We haven't been dating for 8 weeks. We've been together for exactly 8 days, because that's when I had a complete panic attack about being the office spinster and accidentally declared him my boyfriend in front of half the company to avoid the social embarrassment of admitting I was pathetically, depressingly single." The Seattle conference room erupted in surprised murmurs and several barely suppressed snorts of laughter that suggested some people had suspected something wasn't quite right about their timeline. Karen looked like she might need medical attention, her face cycling through confusion, shock, and what might have been the beginning of amusement. "He was kind enough to go along with my completely insane charade rather than humiliate me in front of our colleagues and superiors," Chloe continued, finding her rhythm now, the words coming easier as she leaned into the relief of finally telling the truth. "Which should have been the end of it. A simple favor between co-workers that would last just long enough for me to stage a believable breakup and return to my regularly scheduled solitude and my collection of romance novels that I read while eating ice cream directly from the container." She reached over and took Ethan's hand openly, in full view of both cameras and every person in both rooms, their fingers intertwining naturally despite the chaos she was creating around them. "But here's the thing about pretending to be in love with someone," she said, her voice softening as she spoke directly to him while the rest of the corporate world watched in fascination. "Sometimes you discover that the person you picked at random in a moment of pure desperation is actually perfect for you in ways you never could have planned, predicted, or put in a strategic analysis report. Sometimes a complete lie becomes the truest thing in your entire life." The silence that followed was different this time, not tense or uncomfortable, but expectant, like everyone was holding their breath waiting for the rest of a story they suddenly desperately needed to hear. "So yes," Chloe said, turning back to address David and the cameras and the 20-plus people who were witnessing her public confession. "We completely made up that ridiculous coffee spill meet-cute story. Yes, we invented an entire fictional relationship timeline complete with fake anniversaries, imaginary long-distance phone calls, and a backstory involving homemade brownies that I have never actually made in my life because I'm a disaster in the kitchen. Yes, we've been lying to all of you about how we met, when we started dating, and pretty much every detail of our romantic history except for one thing." She lifted their joined hands, her voice gaining strength from the solid warmth of Ethan's grip. "We're not lying about this," she said firmly. "We're not lying about being absolutely, completely, terrifyingly crazy about each other. We're not lying about the fact that I've fallen so hard for this man that I'm willing to confess to elaborate corporate deception in front of both our bosses, half the company leadership, and whoever else is watching this disaster unfold. Just to avoid lying about my feelings for one more second." The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, and Chloe found herself holding her breath along with everyone else, waiting to see whether her gamble had paid off or whether she'd just destroyed both their careers in the most spectacular fashion possible. Then David Chen started laughing. It began as a quiet chuckle, the kind of sound someone makes when they've just figured out the punchline to a particularly clever joke, and built gradually into full-bodied laughter that made his glasses slide down his nose and brought tears to his eyes. The other Denver executives looked at him in surprise, then at each other, then several of them started laughing too, as if David's reaction had given them permission to find the situation hilarious, rather than scandalous. "Well, I'll be damned," David said, wiping his eyes with a tissue someone handed him from off-camera. "In 30 years of corporate life, that is hands down the most spectacularly honest confession I've ever heard in a business meeting. And also, quite possibly, the most romantic thing I've witnessed outside of my own proposal to my wife." "Romantic?" Chloe squeaked, her voice climbing toward registers that only dolphins could hear. "Are you kidding me?" David grinned, his whole face lighting up with genuine delight. "A woman so desperate to avoid social embarrassment that she accidentally kidnaps a complete stranger into a fake relationship, only to discover he's her perfect match? A man gallant enough to go along with complete and utter insanity to save a colleague's dignity, who then falls genuinely, head over heels in love in the process. That's not corporate fraud, my dear. That's a romantic comedy waiting to happen. Hollywood should be calling you for the movie rights." The Denver office burst into spontaneous applause, quickly followed by the Seattle room. Karen was openly crying now, tears streaming down her face as she clapped enthusiastically. Ashley was bouncing in her seat like an excited child, already forming questions that Chloe could practically see written across her face. Jake from IT was frantically taking notes on his phone, probably already composing the email that would spread this story throughout the entire company network within the hour. "Chloe," David said when the noise died down to a manageable level, "anyone brave enough to publicly confess to elaborate romantic deception in the name of true love has my complete and utter respect. That took genuine courage, the kind of courage that most people never manage to find, even when their entire happiness depends on it. Temporary insanity, more like," Chloe muttered, but she was smiling, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "And Ethan," David continued, turning his attention to the man beside her, "anyone who would go along with such a completely harebrained, elaborate, ridiculous scheme and then have the decency and good fortune to fall genuinely in love in the process, well, that's the most unstrategic, beautifully human thing you've ever done in your entire methodical life, and I'm genuinely proud of you for it." "So we're not fired?" Ethan asked weakly, his voice containing just a hint of the anxiety that had been building for days. "Fired? For what? Creating the most entertaining quarterly review in company history? For proving that you work together better than most couples who've been married for decades? For giving me the best story I'll have to tell at dinner parties for the next 20 years? David shook his head emphatically. I'd be crazy to break up a team with that kind of professional synergy and personal chemistry. Besides, based on that presentation, you two are going to save us more money than the entire accounting department combined. Speaking of which, said Linda Chen, David's wife, who had apparently been watching from off-camera and now moved into view with the kind of smile that suggested she was already planning something. Dinner tonight is definitely, absolutely still happening. I cannot wait to meet the woman who turned David's most logical, careful protege into a romantic fool, willing to commit corporate fraud for love. I object to the characterization of fool, Ethan said with mock dignity. I don't, Chloe said cheerfully, squeezing his hand. I'm a fool for you too. It's mutual foolishness, which makes it either twice as romantic or twice as ridiculous, depending on your perspective. Even better, Linda laughed, clapping her hands together with obvious delight. 7 o'clock at Casina Spinasso. David's buying dinner, I'm buying wine, and I want to hear every single detail of this absolutely ridiculous, completely wonderful love story. Don't leave anything out. I want to know about the panic attack, the fake coffee story, how you kept it secret, what made you fall for each other, everything. That might take several bottles of wine, Chloe warned. I'm prepared for that possibility, Linda said solemnly. As the video conference wrapped up with congratulations, laughter, promises to send the final presentation materials by end of day, and at least 6 different requests for the real story of their relationship, Chloe felt a weight lift off her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The truth was out. The sky hadn't fallen. David Chen thought they were romantic instead of fraudulent, and somehow she'd managed to keep both her job and her boyfriend in the same spectacular confession. So, Ethan said as their colleagues began filtering out of the conference room, chattering excitedly about the morning's revelations, and already planning the gossip sessions that would dominate lunch conversations for the next week. That happened. That definitely happened, Chloe agreed, slumping back in her chair as the adrenaline rush of public confession began to fade, leaving her feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. How do you feel about being the star of the office's new favorite love story? Terrified mostly, Ethan admitted, loosening his tie slightly, the first crack in his professional composure she'd seen all day. But also, relieved? It's nice not to have to keep track of fictional timelines and made-up anniversaries anymore. My brain wasn't designed for that level of creative storytelling. Just our real timeline now, Chloe said, then paused, a thought occurring to her that made her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. We do have a real timeline now, right? This isn't just elaborate method acting that got out of hand? Instead of answering with words, Ethan turned in his chair to face her fully, cupped her face in both his hands with a gentleness that made her breath catch, and kissed her right there in the conference room, in full view of anyone who cared to look, with a thoroughness and intensity that left absolutely no doubt about the reality of his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder than a simple kiss warranted, he rested his forehead against hers and said, "Does that answer your question about method acting?" "I might need some additional clarification," Chloe said breathlessly, her heart doing gymnastics routines in her chest. "You know, for the sake of timeline accuracy and documentation purposes." "I think I can arrange that," Ethan said, kissing her again with a smile that could have powered the entire West Coast electrical grid. "Get a room," Jake called from the doorway, but he was grinning widely, clearly enjoying the romantic drama that was unfolding in his workplace. "We have one," Ethan called back without taking his eyes off Chloe. "It's called my apartment, and we're going there right now to celebrate surviving corporate confessions and public relationship reveals." "Is that what we're calling it?" Chloe asked, raising an eyebrow. "Among other things," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse spike in the most delicious way. 6 hours later, Chloe sat across from David and Linda Chen at what was quite possibly the most romantic restaurant in Seattle, watching Ethan tell the story of their fake-turned-real relationship with animated gestures, frequent laughter, and occasional glances in her direction. that made her stomach flutter like she was 16 again and experiencing her first real crush. The restaurant was absolutely perfect for the occasion. Intimate lighting that made everyone look like they were glowing softly. Exposed brick walls that created the kind of atmosphere romance novelists spent paragraphs describing, and Italian food that was so good it made her understand why people wrote poetry about carbohydrates. The wine was excellent, the company was delightful, and the conversation flowed as easily as if they'd all been friends for years, instead of having just met a few hours ago. Linda hung on every word of their story, occasionally interjecting with questions that made Chloe blush, and Ethan stumble charmingly over his responses. She wanted to know about their first fake date, coffee and budget reviews that had somehow turned into 3 hours of conversation about everything except work, their first real kiss, Saturday morning in his kitchen, over pancakes and coffee origin stories, and what had made them realize their feelings were genuine, a question that led to a 20-minute discussion about the exact moment they'd each stopped pretending. "So let me get this completely straight," Linda said during the antipasti course, gesturing with her wine glass for emphasis. "You two went from complete strangers to fake couple to real couple in the span of 8 days." "When you put it like that, it sounds completely and utterly insane," Chloe said, taking a sip of wine that was probably worth more than her monthly coffee budget. "It sounds efficient," David corrected, cutting into his appetizer with the precision of someone who approached even casual dining with strategic planning. "Why waste time with traditional dating rituals when you can skip straight to the important stuff? The important stuff being public humiliation and potential career suicide?" Ethan asked dryly. "The important stuff being finding someone who's worth taking enormous risks for," Linda said softly, her expression growing tender as she looked at her husband. "Trust me, I know a thing or two about love that defies logic and common sense. David proposed to me on our 3rd date." "3rd date?" Chloe nearly choked on her wine, coughing slightly as she tried to process this information. "That's crazy? Impulsive? Completely unlike the careful, methodical, strategic man you know from work?" Linda grinned, clearly enjoying Chloe's shocked expression. "Love makes people do completely uncharacteristic things. It's one of its better features, in my opinion." "But how did you know?" Chloe asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "How did you know it was real and not just infatuation or temporary insanity?" Linda and David exchanged one of those married couple looks that contained entire conversations in a single glance. "I knew," Linda said finally, "because David made me want to be braver. Not in big dramatic ways, but in small, everyday ways that added up to something significant. He made me want to try foods I'd never eaten, visit places I'd never been, have conversations about topics I'd never considered. He made my world bigger. And I knew," David added, reaching across the table to cover his wife's hand with his own, "because Linda made me remember that life wasn't just about achieving goals and optimizing outcomes. She made me remember that the best parts of life, the parts that actually matter, can't be planned or predicted or put into spreadsheets. She taught me that sometimes the most important strategic decision you can make is to stop strategizing and just live." Chloe felt her throat tighten unexpectedly at the obvious love and affection in their voices, the easy intimacy that came from 20 years of choosing each other every day. "Speaking of uncharacteristic behavior and important decisions," David said, turning his attention back to them with that sharp, interested expression that meant he was about to ask a question that would require careful consideration. "What's next for you two, now that the truth is out and you're officially Seattle's most talked-about couple?" Chloe and Ethan exchanged a glance across the table, and she could see him running the same calculation she was, weighing possibilities, considering timelines, trying to figure out how to navigate the transition from fake relationship to real relationship, while maintaining their professional partnership and not completely terrifying each other with the intensity of feelings that had developed at warp speed. "We're taking it one day at a time," Ethan said diplomatically, falling back on the safe, non-committal response they discussed earlier. "Smart approach in theory," David nodded approvingly, But if I were a betting man, which I am, especially when it comes to matters of the heart, I'd say you'll be engaged within 6 months. David! Linda swatted his arm with her napkin, but she was smiling. Don't pressure them. They just figured out they actually like each other without the fake relationship framework. Let them have some time to adjust to reality. I'm not pressuring anyone, David replied with the kind of innocence that didn't fool anyone. I'm simply making an educated prediction based on observable data and behavioral patterns. They work together like they've been a professional team for years. They look at each other like they're sharing private jokes and secret languages, and they just risked their careers and reputations to avoid lying about their feelings for one more day. That's not casual dating behavior. That's serious long-term commitment behavior. What would you know about casual dating? Linda asked, raising an eyebrow at her husband. You proposed to me before we'd even established exclusive relationship status. You skipped about 6 months of normal relationship development. Exactly my point, David said triumphantly, raising his wine glass like he'd just won a particularly satisfying argument. When you know, and these two definitely know, even if they're still processing the knowing part. Know what exactly? Chloe asked, though she wasn't sure she was ready for the answer. That you found your person, Linda said simply. The person who makes you want to be better, braver, more honest, more yourself than you've ever been before. The person worth taking ridiculous risks for, worth changing your entire life plan for, worth building a future with even when that future looks nothing like what you thought you wanted. Later, as they walked back to Ethan's car through the Seattle evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights and the air smelling clean and full of possibilities. Chloe found herself thinking about Linda's words and David's prediction with a mixture of excitement and terror that was rapidly becoming her default emotional state. 6 months, she said suddenly, stopping under a streetlight that cast everything in warm, golden tones. What about it? Ethan asked, though something in his expression suggested he'd been thinking about the same timeline, running the same calculations, considering the same possibilities. Do you think he's right? About the engagement thing? The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended, loaded with implications and hopes and fears she wasn't sure she was ready to examine too closely. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the amber glow of the streetlight, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. Are you asking me if I think we'll get engaged in 6 months? He said carefully. Or are you asking me if I want to get engaged in 6 months? Maybe both? Chloe said, suddenly feeling shy despite everything they'd shared over the past week. Despite the public confessions and professional partnerships, and the fact that they'd basically announced their relationship to half the corporate world via video conference. Well, Ethan said slowly, pulling his hands from his pockets to reach out and tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, with the kind of gentleness that made her heart skip several beats. I think David Chen is one of the smartest, most perceptive people I've ever met. And his track record for reading people and predicting outcomes is pretty much flawless. So that's a yes to his timeline being accurate? That's a yes to David being incredibly smart and unusually good at recognizing genuine compatibility when he sees it, Ethan said, then paused, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone in a gesture that was becoming familiar and precious. But I think his timeline might be a little optimistic. Chloe's heart sank slightly, disappointment flooding through her before she could stop it, until Ethan continued with a smile that could have powered the entire Pacific Northwest. I'm thinking more like 3 months, maybe 4 if we want to be really conservative about it. Ethan Brooks, she laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest as relief and joy and pure happiness washed over her. Are you telling me you're already planning to propose? We've been actually dating for exactly 8 days. I'm telling you that I'm strategically evaluating all available options and their potential long-term outcomes, he said with mock seriousness, then broke into the kind of grin that made her understand why people wrote songs about falling in love. Which is corporate speak for yes, absolutely. The moment I figure out how to do it without completely terrifying you, or making you think I've completely lost my mind. Too late for both of those, Chloe said, throwing her arms around his neck despite the fact that they were standing on a public sidewalk in downtown Seattle, with people walking past them. I'm already terrified and convinced you're crazy, but the absolute best kind of both. The good kind of terrified? Ethan asked, pulling her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist like he was anchoring himself to something precious. The kind that means I'm about to do something that might change my entire life in ways I can't predict or control, she said, looking up into his eyes and seeing her future reflected there, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. The kind that means I'm falling in love with someone I never expected, faster than I ever thought possible. And I don't care if it's crazy or impractical or completely against every reasonable relationship timeline ever devised. It's definitely all of those things, Ethan agreed, leaning down to kiss her softly under the streetlight, surrounded by the sounds of the city and the promise of everything that was still to come. But you know what? What? She asked against his lips. The best things in life usually are crazy and impractical and completely unreasonable, he said, kissing her again with a thoroughness that made her forget they were standing on a public sidewalk. Besides, we've already established that we're excellent at making unconventional choices work out in our favor. As they walked the rest of the way to his car, hands linked and hearts full, talking about everything and nothing, their favorite books, their biggest fears, what they wanted to do on their first official real date, whether they should get a joint savings account for their future wedding expenses, how they were going to explain this story to their future children. Chloe thought about the improbable, impossible chain of events that had brought them to this moment. From a panic-induced lie in a conference room to this sidewalk, where everything felt possible and right, and beautifully, chaotically perfect. From a desperate attempt to avoid social embarrassment to finding the person who made her want to be brave enough to risk everything for love. She'd started the week as a single woman, desperately trying to escape office gossip and her own insecurities about being alone. She was ending it as half of what Karen had already declared, the greatest workplace love story in company history, with a promotion pending. Turns out that publicly confessing to elaborate deception while delivering flawless quarterly projections was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that impressed senior management. A boyfriend who made her laugh and think and want to be braver every single day. And a story she'd be telling at dinner parties and family gatherings for the rest of her life. "Hey, Ethan," she said as he opened the car door for her with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that made her heart skip and reminded her daily that she'd somehow managed to find one of the good ones. "Yeah? Next time I have exactly 5 seconds to give an answer to an impossible question, and my entire future depends on what comes out of my mouth in that moment." "Yeah? I'm definitely picking you again, every single time, without hesitation for the rest of my life." Ethan's smile was bright enough to compete with the Seattle skyline and warm enough to chase away the autumn chill. "Good to know," he said, kissing her one more time against the car door, soft and sweet and full of promises about their shared future. "Because I'm planning on being available for all your future impossible questions, emergency situations, and corporate fraud schemes." "Just corporate fraud? What about tax evasion and insider trading?" "I'll have to check my schedule," he said solemnly, "but I think I can pencil you in for a lifetime of white-collar crime and romantic comedy scenarios." And as they drove through the city toward whatever came next, Ethan's apartment, where they'd spend the evening planning their first official date as a real couple, tomorrow, where they'd face their colleagues as the office's newest and most celebrated success story, the weekend, where they'd already planned to visit farmers markets and bookstores and all the places couples went to learn each other's rhythms and preferences, the indefinite future, where anything seemed possible and everything felt within reach. Chloe realized that David Chen had been absolutely right about one crucial thing. When you found the person who made you want to be braver, smarter, better, more honest, more yourself than you'd ever been before, you held on tight and never let go. Even if you had to accidentally lie to an entire office, commit corporate fraud, and confess your deception in front of half the company leadership to figure it out. 3 months later, when Ethan proposed with a ring hidden inside a coffee cup at the place where they'd had their first real date, not the fictional coffee spill encounter from their fake backstory, but the nervous, giddy, completely authentic afternoon where they'd talked for 4 hours about everything except work, and forgotten to eat their food because they were too busy discovering they had everything in common. Chloe would realize that some of the best love stories started with the worst lies. But mostly, she'd realize that she'd been right all along about one thing. Ethan Brooks was definitely worth 5 seconds of pure panic, a lifetime of beautiful chaos, and whatever impossible questions the future might bring. 6 months later, at their engagement party in the same conference room where their fake relationship had begun, surrounded by colleagues and friends and family who couldn't stop talking about their romantic comedy love story, David Chen would raise a toast and declare that he'd never made a more accurate prediction in his 30 years of corporate life. And Chloe, wearing the engagement ring that caught the light every time she gestured, would look at Ethan, her partner in crime, her favorite strategic planner, her accidentally chosen soulmate, and think that sometimes the universe really did have a sense of humor. Sometimes it knew exactly what you needed, even when you had no idea what you were looking for. Sometimes 5 seconds of desperation could lead to a lifetime of happiness. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave and willing to take ridiculous risks for love, you got to keep the person you accidentally chose in a moment of complete panic. Forever. The end.